Hey, rock stars, you're in for a real treat on this interview with Bob Clearmountain. He's made an incredible number of records, including working with the Rolling Stones, and we got a chance to talk about both Tattoo You and Voodoo Lounge on this interview. And shortly after the interview, though, sadly, we lost the great Charlie Watts playing drums for the Rolling Stones. So this interview is dedicated to Charlie Watts. Thanks for keeping the heartbeat of rock and roll going. This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and iZotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through iZotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
Pretty standard that you do a normal mix, you do a vocal up half dB, a vocal down half dB, a backing track, which is no lead vocal, but with backing vocals, and then an instrumental mix, no vocals, and then an a cappella, which is just vocals without any music. And sometimes it's a separate lead vocal and separate backing vocals. Of course, now there's also the Atmos mix that goes along with it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. If you are rocking a Mac Mini M1 in your studio, then you should definitely check out the new OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution. It's the perfect size to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or old Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom-wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Bob Clearmountain, an American recording engineer, mixer, and record producer. He's worked with many prominent names in music, including Bruce Springsteen, mixing his Born in the U.S.A. album and 25 other projects, the Rolling Stones, including Tattoo You and Voodoo Lounge, amongst over 20 album, movie, and concert video projects. Bryan Adams, producing and mixing nearly all of his albums since 1983. Robbie Williams, Huey Lewis and the News, Toto, Bon Jovi, Simple Minds, The Pretenders, The Who, David Bowie, Roxy Music, Bryan Ferry, INXS, and hundreds of other artists. He is also married to Apogee Electronics CEO Bennett and has created a plugin for mixing called Spaces that we actually have some questions about on this show. With multiple Platinum LPs, Grammy Awards, Emmys, and even a Les Paul Award, Bob continues to be one of the world's premier mixers, working from his studio in Los Angeles, Mix This, sharing his knowledge also with us in places like Mix with the Masters, and luckily right here on Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm excited to have Bob joining us today on the show and have gathered up a great bunch of questions from you, Rockstars, in our Facebook group. So if you want to join the group, please follow the link below, which will be in the show notes. You will also find a great discography there and a playlist of Bob's work. Thanks also so much to Brian Murphy for connecting us and to Kelly Musgrave over at Linear Management for all your help. Please welcome Bob Clearmountain to Recording Studio Rockstars. Bob, are you ready to rock?
Yeah.
Awesome,
absolutely.
Man.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us on the show, dude. It's really wonderful to meet you. We met very briefly once at the opening of Sterling mastering over here in Nashville, just passing in the hallway. But it's great to finally like connect with you and have a chance to just talk and catch up.
Yeah, great. Excellent. That's nice to see you.
Tell us a little bit about where you are right now. You're joining us from your studio, Mix This, and I know you guys are doing some big changes. So I thought maybe we just start out learning more about your workspace there and what you're excited about right now.
Yeah, well, I'm in the Pacific Palisades, in the basement of my house, actually, in the Palisades, and I got this studio that we built we bought the house in 93 and built a studio kind of 6 months later. And it's just, I was looking for a house with a separate building, but I couldn't afford anything with a separate building in this town. And so we found this place and had a really large basement. And it was custom made, and we've been going since October of 93. We opened up, and the first thing we did here was Streets of Philadelphia for Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, wow.
And so it's gone on from there. I mean, originally, I didn't know if it was going to work. And so we built the room, and I rented gear. I rented an entire studio from Sting. He's got this thing he calls Steer Pike, which is, it was a fold-up SSL, custom made for him by SSL. And all the gear, racks of outboard gear, had speakers, chairs, a 48-track Sony digital machine. I think they did. Yeah, because I had one as well. So I had two of those at the time. And so we did that for 6 months, and then it was full on the whole time. And so I sent the fold-up studio back to Sting and bought my own gear. I had a custom-made SSL made, one of the last G pluses actually that I think they ever made for me, because then they came out with the J right after that. Of course, I was angry. Oh, how come you didn't tell me you were coming out with a new console? Until I used it, and then I was like, oh, thank God. Thank God I bought the G.
So the G is the preferred one.
Oh, it's so much better. I mean, hate to say it, but that J was, I thought, in my opinion, was a disaster, especially the computer compared to the G computer. It's like still amazing. It's 27 years later, and the thing works perfectly, and just the best mixing, automated mixing system on the planet still.
That's awesome. I noticed on your website you say that the SSL that you have is just simply the best mixing console, hands down.
Yeah, it is. And it keeps getting better because I keep improving it. I keep modifying it.
Well, we might be getting ahead of ourselves and giving a hint as to what the answer is going to be when people are asking about mixing on consoles and in the box, the inevitable question that will be coming. But you guys are also putting in an Atmos system now, is that right?
Yeah, well, we what happened was I previously mixed the first three albums for the band for each of their 50th anniversaries. And the band was a group that who, if anybody's not familiar with them, they were, in the 60s, they were like the American Beatles almost. I mean, they were hugely popular. And I was a massive fan when I was a kid. And so to me, it's such a privilege working with them and with Robbie Robertson, who is the kind of the remaining member. And yeah, so then the fourth album came up, and the label called me up and said, "Oh, we'd like you to mix the fourth one also, but instead of just 5/1, because I'd done 5/1 mixes for the first three, they said, is there any way you could deliver an Atmos mix?" And I'm thinking, Atmos, sure. I'm sure I can figure out a way to do that.
Yeah.
So after about 20 grand and a couple weeks later, I was still in the middle of that record. I was still installing it and figuring out how to do it. And but then now I have an Atmos mix room.
That's awesome. The I did notice one other thing that you did for your studio prior to Atmos that was also inspired by the band, now that you're bringing it up, which is to have a poolside studio. What was the movie that they did where they did one of their great records right in the pool house, right?
Yeah, they did. I believe it was
there's a whole documentary about it.
It was the second album, the self-titled album they did in Sammy Davis Jr.'s pool house.
That's awesome.
In Vegas, I think it was, or LA. I forgot where it was. But yeah, that's right.
That's great. It's a wonderful movie. Definitely check that out, Rockstars, if you can find it on Netflix or wherever it is. Well, so now putting Atmos into your studio, that's no small decision. I mean, is that something that all of us should be thinking about, or is that sort of a pretty advanced modification to a studio?
Well, there's quite a bit to it. Yeah. I mean, it isn't just adding some more speakers. It's we had to add another second computer besides my print rig, because I already have two computers. I have a multi-track rig, which is the old cheese grater, and then I have a trash can, which is the print rig. So I usually print to that, and then I had to add another trash can for the Atmos renderer. Now, apparently, you don't really have to do that. That you can actually run the Atmos renderer software in the same computer, but apparently it can be a bit taxing on the processor, and so it's actually better to keep them separate. And then they're connected by Dante. They're interfaced together by Dante, and also through my Apogee Symphony Mark II. So I use the Dante card on that interfaces. Plus, I got a monitor mixer, a Grace monitor mixer to control the speakers in the control room.
I was looking ahead here in our Facebook questions. I'm trying to remember who it was that asked. Oh, here you go. This is one that came in from Jesse Miller. He was asking why you mixed to a second Pro Tools rig. And now that you're bringing it up, might as well just jump right to that. He said, what did he say? He said, as in mix multi-track to 2-track, like in the olden days. What is the reasoning behind having a second Pro Tools rig like that?
Well, it's funny that you say, yeah, like the old days, we'd mix from a multi-track to a stereo tape machine, which I was always used to that. And so I never looked at it that way, but that could be part of it. But I just always found it complicated to actually find tracks on the multi-track. And sometimes it would just get huge because you do all these different versions of mixes and you'd end up with, massive numbers of tracks, plus the fact that I started mixing 5.1 surround. So that meant 8 channels on every pass, 8 tracks of every pass, plus the fact that sample rates come in at all different rates. And I like everything to go out at 96K. And so that keeps them separate. I don't really have to think about sample rates at all. The multi-track is one thing. It's going through an analog desk. So it's by default, it's being converted to 96K.
Right.
And it just keeps the bookkeeping. I keep all the mix. I have a big server that has all the multi-track files in one file, and then all the mixes in another. So it just keeps it all separate, and it's a lot easier to keep track of. There's a whole bunch of reasons. Not only that, but if I'm doing film, this hasn't really come up very much, but if you're doing film, sometimes you'll have a pull up or a pull down, and then that makes that bit, because you're pulling up or pulling down on the multi-track, and now the print rig is not affected by that. They're also locked together through video sync as well. So they're actually locked, even though they're different sample rates most of the time.
Yeah, so you have to have a master clock. Again, traditional studios have a master clock, clocking all these different pieces of gear in the studio.
Yeah, I have an Apogee Big Ben master clock that's supplying word clock to the multi-track, and then video sync to the Sync HD on the print rig.
Man, I feel like I'm
that
back at a college preparing for my final exam on this stuff.
right.
I mean, like,
Yeah,
I
well,
don't think I've even heard the expression pull up, pull down in so long. It's just a
yeah,
reminder that at that level, you know, these are all super important things. We've just gotten used to the simplicity of a home computer.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. But if you're, doing the big projects, some of that's be important. I mean, the pull up and pull down, I haven't had to deal with that in years, and so I don't know how valid it is. But I thought I'd mention it. At one time, it was important.
That's awesome. Well, so how many speakers actually go into the setup?
Well, I got 12 speakers. It's basically a 7-1 system with my Dyne audios. So 7 normal. They're all pretty much the same size as the BM15As with a sub, and then there's 4 speakers in the ceiling, and boy, I searched forever trying to figure out what to put. The ones Dolby recommends are usually these big JBLs or some kind of a thing. That my ceiling's 8. It's an 8-foot ceiling. It's the basement of my house, so I don't have a lot of room. I don't want big powered speakers hanging down. I didn't want to have to run power up to the ceiling. I just wanted to run. So I found these little passive Sony, I forgot the model number, but they're consumer Atmos speakers designed to stick a pair of them on your front speakers, and they bounce off the ceiling, right? But these things, they work just as well to have 4 of them in the ceiling, and they're sort of angled, so they sort of angle in a little bit towards me, and they're just perfect. I mean, they're just little. I think they're 4-inch or something like that. I think they're 4-inch speakers, but for what I put up there, it's mostly just effects. I rarely put any actual instruments up there because, I mean, there's not many bands that hang from the ceiling. They're musicians from the ceiling.
The Monkees, come on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I on this Joe Bonamassa record, there's this one break where these sort of Hitchcocky kind of strings come in, and I put them up there. And so once in a while I'll put something interesting up, but usually it's nothing with a lot of bottom. Plus I do some bass management with the Grace, so that sound that's going up there is still getting some proper bottom end in case I do put something more substantial.
Interesting. Well, I mean, now you of course have had experience mixing in surround and probably mixing in everything that's ever come along as the next big thing. How does this feel similar or different to you in terms of the experience of mixing and making creative decisions and stuff like that about what goes where?
Well, I think it could be just a fad. You know what I mean? Especially the way Apple and some of these, a lot of people are pushing it towards the binaural version in headphones, which is pretty vague. You go, okay, you really have to have a good imagination to imagine that something is coming out behind you, I think. Right. I don't know. Either that or they just haven't gotten it down yet. I don't know. I know what comes out of the Dolby Render. I shouldn't speak about Apple because they're doing their own binaural thing. But what comes out of the Dolby Renderer, and they call it binaural, is
it's like a facsimile of binaural, right?
I don't know what it is. Yeah, it doesn't even sound. I don't know. Yeah. I shouldn't say, but
well, I mean, you've probably heard like legitimate binaural recordings with a binaural mic and a good pair of headphones.
Yeah, sure. Because Apogee actually makes a binaural, earbuds with microphones in them, and it's a true binaural. Yeah, and that actually works quite well.
That's pretty fun. So you hear what gets recorded responds to your own head and your own ears, which is all part of that whole thing.
It uses your own head, yeah.
I do think it's all very fascinating, the moving forward with the technology. It's a lot of fun. I applaud us all for trying to figure out new ways to do things. And I do agree that the most people are going to be listening in earbuds to all this music that's getting created. But you're of course doing things that are going to play in theaters. They are going to be played back on proper Atmos systems, and so it's probably pretty exciting.
Well, it's so much fun. I mean, I love it. Don't get me wrong. I play stuff for my friends that come over, and their jaws are on the floor. They can't believe what they're hearing. Some of these things. It's so much fun. I just like the idea of feeling like you're right in the middle of the music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I first started mixing surround, I thought, well, this is silly. Why would there be a guitar coming out of the back? And then I thought about it a little bit more. But if you were sitting in the studio, like an imaginary studio, and the band is all around you, this is what you might be hearing, or what you would imagine you'd be hearing. Of course, real recording sessions, if you were sitting in the middle of a studio, it wouldn't really sound that good because everybody's listening through headphones anyway. But
yeah,
that's why I say like an imaginary recording session.
Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Not so with Samply. It's easy to add collaborators to a project so the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. Just upload your voice memo or mix and start collaborating. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com, or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. With so many game-changing iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all their plugins through iZotope's affordable subscription bundle, Music Production Suite Pro, for only $19.99 per month? Get your Rockstar extended 30-day free trial subscription now at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. We probably all want to know this question, but how will Bob Clearmountain treat the snare drum in an Atmos mix? I'm jumping ahead here, but of course you're famous for having an incredible snare and in mixes that you've done, and creating this space that just gets you excited, and it's unique and it's got personality. Have you already thought about ways that you might integrate the Atmos speakers into, the rhythm section of a record?
To be honest, I treat it pretty much like stereo. The main elements of the rhythm section are usually still in the front. The drums are LCR, the snare drum's in the middle speaker, the bass drum's in the middle, kind of spread out. Actually, I usually spread them out. I use a bit of divergence for the main part of the drums. Cymbals are left and right front. Most of that I keep in the front, and because I think of it as a visual thing. And so normally you're facing the drummer and you're facing the bass player, and the singer's in the middle, the main singer. But the backing vocals might be spread out, and then if you have doubled power chords, maybe I'll put them in the side speakers just for fun. And then any other keyboards usually in the back. And if there's any strings and horns, maybe they'll be in the back or around the sides, things like that. But the rhythm section is usually, I try to keep the focus of the music basically in the front, so you're facing it.
Yeah, well, I guess keyboards now, or maybe always have created this atmospheric quality to music, which probably makes it a little easier to move those into the spatial parts of a mix, right?
Exactly. And then the ceiling speakers, I actually have a quad impulse response of our Apogee Studio, which is just a nice warm, it's a short decay time, but it's this really warm sort of just atmosphere. And that I put in the quad speakers in the ceiling. And then sometimes I'll put a little like a slap delay in the back ceiling speakers, something like that. Sometimes I'll put the cymbal mics in somewhere between the front and the ceiling front speakers. things like that. So it sounds like the cymbals are up higher.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, just things like that. And a lot of it, when you're listening, you don't even notice it. It's just that if it goes away, then, oh, well, what happened? You know what I mean? Like if you switch back to the stereo, all of a sudden it's like, oh, what happened to all the all that cool stuff I was feeling? You know, it's more of a feeling thing than an actual hearing.
Nice. I'll jump over and ask you whether or not you're using, I think one of the sounds in your plugin, Clearmountain Spaces, which is an Apogee plugin. Although I'm kind of asking because I'm new to it myself, but that you do the Apogee Studio as a space in there, and that was one of the questions that came in from Megan Gohill. Just curious about how he loves that reverb plugin, and he wanted to hear you talk a little bit more about that as well.
Well, it's interesting because that's actually a subset of Clearmountain's domain, which is a much more extensive delay reverb effects program. I mean, those are just three of the reverbs that are in that. And I was actually hesitant about putting Spaces out because I wanted there to be more to it. But I mean, it is good that, the impulse responses are ones that I got myself with Roger Rabindra from Apogee. The two of us just went out and created these things, and from various spaces that we found, and so hopefully there'll be another version with more. And there's a new version of the. I mean, the real program is the Clearmountain's domain. I mean, that's more. The Spaces is just like an introduction to that.
Okay.
Because the domain has all kinds of delays and wacky things, just to kind of trying to duplicate what I do in the analog world on my SSL and digital delays and on my reverbs and everything, you know.
Can you, apologies for not already knowing much about domain myself, but I guess we can ask the basic question. Can you describe it to us a little bit as far as what it looks like or how we would use it in a mix?
Yeah, well, it's you would normally use it off a send, you know, and you wouldn't normally put it on a track, although you can. You're able to do that. But yeah, so you would use it, and it's got like a stereo delay, and that delay you can either can regenerate into itself or into the opposite side delay. And then it's got EQs for each stage. It's got harmonizers that are with the along with the delay to thicken them up a little bit. Those things all feed into a variety of reverbs, of impulse responses that we created. There's also something called blur, which is really like an overdrive distortion. And the idea of that was, when you go to see a rock show in an arena or something like that, sounds bouncing off the walls, but it might be an overdriven PA from an overly enthusiastic front house mixer, and so it's trying to duplicate that sort of distorted PA system bouncing off the walls, you know, that kind of thing. And then you can use it for a lot of other things too. You know, I've had a lot of people that they can't believe what that is. And I was pretty amazed when our programmer, I just kept sending him examples of the kind of thing I wanted. And he kept sending me back stuff that sounded terrible. And then finally one day I get this thing, it's like, whoa, what the fuck's that? It was perfect. It was like, nice. This is exactly it, you know, and beyond anything I could even imagine. And
that's pretty wild. Have you ever had anybody mix your projects? I mean, it almost sounds like the description of working in a creative process where you're sending off something and it comes back, and then when it's right, you get all excited, super excited about it.
Yeah, it is like that. Yeah. No, unfortunately, I'm trying to think I've had people do dance mixes. A couple of times I've hired dance mixers to remix things that I produced. But other than that, I've tried to record companies. I said, look, could I just get somebody else to mix this? Because I think I'm too close to it, like things that I produced. And they said, no, we hired you because we want your mixing.
That's
so
awesome.
Okay, and that's around the time when I finally gave up producing. I said, okay, I get it.
What are some of the things that you do really love about producing when you get to do it? And I'm going to give a shout out right now. So one of the records in your discography that you did produce is a few of them actually was with the artist Jonathan Brooke, who is just for a little aside, my cousin Jennifer Kimball was in the story with Jonathan.
Ah, right.
Jonathan, believe it or not, was my babysitter one summer.
No kidding.
It's a small world. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. She was sort of driving my brother and I to the pool and, watching my younger sister. So amazing singer and amazing talent. But anyway, I just thought I'd drop that in there.
Well, that's the only art. Well, I mean, I enjoyed working with Bryan Adams, although can be a real pain in the ass. But Jonathan is certainly anything but a pain in the ass. She's just wonderful, and it was just, those are the only projects I've ever produced that I totally enjoyed. You know what I mean? Because she's just a pleasure and so easy to work with and, first takes all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, she's just so massively talented that, and she's a good friend as well.
Yeah.
And so
incredible voice too, an incredible singer.
But that's the thing. I just never liked producing, to be honest. And especially when it was, you get the producers, it's a tough job, man. People don't realize you're in the middle of the label and the management and the band. And sometimes, you get some really moody singer or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, it's a lot to deal with. You really have to be a good psychologist.
Yeah, it's a lot of politics too, right?
It's politics and psychology, and I'm not good at either one of those things. And not only that, but I'm a bass player, and so I know music, but I'm not the kind of guy that can go over to the piano and say, "Look, you should play this chord," and I'm not quite that talented musically, unfortunately, and I just felt, and I worked with so many incredible producers, like Don Was and Tony Berg, and some of these guys are, and they're incredible, and I see what they do, and how well they talk, how they talk to the musicians and get them to do what they want without putting too much pressure on them or getting mad at them or anything, and it's like, man, I just don't have the patience for this. I just can't do it. And not only that, but every time I'd produce a record, like I know it would always be the end of the day, and I'd always go, "Does anybody want a nice rough mix? I could do a rough mix." Because that was my favorite part.
Right. So there's so many questions I want to ask you. I'm going to just pivot right when you bring something up. So the rough mix thing, a friend of mine, Chris Graham, was mentioning that, he heard the story about you always wanted to jump in and do people's rough mixes and sort of inventing the position of mix engineer for yourself. Is there some truth to that story?
I don't know if that's what, I mean, people do give me credit for inventing it. I think more because my manager at the time, a wonderful guy named Dan Crew, who was, if anybody remembers Bob Crew from the 60s, he was Bob was Dan's brother. And but people were coming to me specifically just to mix their record. I remember one time I was in New York and some guy flew all the way to New York so that he could sit with me to mix his record. And I was like, wow, you actually got on a plane and came here so I could mix your record? I was so shocked, And Dan said, well, I could get you a point for mixing, a point on the record for mixing. I said, no, you can't. Nobody gives an engineer or a mixer a point. That's crazy. I said, no, I think I could do that, because he could see what was happening, that people were coming to me specifically, which really didn't happen very much. And sure enough, I was the first one to ever get points for mixing.
The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring the PFM HD1000 master reference monitors, I was blown away. It was like listening to 3D holographic audio where I could reach out and touch the instruments with rock solid bass down to 20 hertz. It was awesome. And now I've got one of my very own at the Toy Box Studio in East Nashville. What's amazing is that the Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room too, or even your bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free Introduction to Mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. It must feel pretty good to have somebody who's just pulling for you so you can focus on, creating in the studio, working with a manager, for example, and having somebody who's just out there, looking for opportunities and who always has your back.
Yeah. Well, Dan wasn't part of our deal. He said, look, because I had to talk him into managing me because I knew him because he was the husband of somebody I was working with. And he said, look, I'm not going to hustle work for you. I'll never do that because I hate the record business and I'm just not interested. And because he managed his brother all through the 60s with all the Four Seasons and all that kind of stuff. And he was sick of it. And so I said, okay, well, you don't really have to because, I'm just, the phone's ringing all the time. In the 80s, I mean, there was no problem trying to get work.
Yeah.
And so it was just a matter of he would answer the phone and help me figure out what I should do and what I shouldn't do and stuff like that.
That's groovy.
He would help me with decisions like the Let's Dance album for Bowie came up and the deal was really nothing. You know what I mean? It's like I wasn't going to get paid very much for it. And he said, and I said, Dan, really, should I do this? I mean, is this worth it? He goes, you should do it. And he was the guy always pushing to get me more money, and he said, no, this one, you should absolutely do it. And it was sure the best decision I ever made, to do Let's Dance album.
Amazing. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but why would that not have been already assumed to be a big budget album at that time? I would have, not knowing anything, I would have guessed that would have been a no-brainer record and that there would have been plenty of budget for something like that. Was Bowie still sort of, I don't know, was there something about that was still an upward trajectory at that point?
I don't really know. I mean, I know I was a huge Bowie fan, so I was really into doing it. I think, unfortunately, you can't ask him anymore. That's the unfortunate thing. But from what I understand, he got burned by a manager years before that. And he was really cheap with his money because he had been ripped off pretty badly.
Yeah. So he was being cautious.
So he was being very cautious. And he said, I don't want to pay anybody too much or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't think he was a cheap guy. I just think that because he had been burned, he was like,
well, it's just fascinating.
And then I was just like, okay, well, fine. Well, I'll do this because this will be fun. It only took 3 weeks, for Christ's sake, start to finish. And so it was actually turned out to be not a problem.
Yeah. Well, an amazing, amazing record. And of course, that's in the discography or the playlist Rockstars. So make sure you click through and listen to all these records. Let's talk about bass for a sec. You mentioned you were a bass player, and it was a lot of fun to discover that you came up from the punk rock era of all things, that you played with the Dead Boys. And, I'm thinking about Steve Albini also coming up in the punk rock era. Talk a little bit about your transitioning from bass into making records.
Well, it wasn't really like that. I mean, I transitioned years before that. I was just in bar bands in Connecticut, and the last band I was in was doing a demo at a place called Media Sound in New York in 1972, and the band split up because the guitar player was screwing the lead singer's girlfriend, and and that's when I went, okay, forget this being in a band, and I got to depend on these assholes, and so
you're saying those shenanigans don't happen in the studio setting too?
Well, except I'm on the other side of the glass and I'm getting paid by the studio or whatever, at the time. And so I decided, let me try and get a job in the studio, because that's what I really wanted to do. I hated being on stage. I didn't really want to be in a band. I didn't want to, that life didn't particularly appeal to me. And when I went, first time I walked into the studio in the Media Sound, as much as it wasn't the greatest at the time, wasn't a great studio, I just thought, this is fantastic. I could live in this place. And so I talked them into hiring me finally. And that was that. They hired me. My first they hired me as a runner, and I figured I'd do that for 2 or 3 years and then graduate to being an assistant eventually. Well, the first day, it turns out they didn't need a runner, and they said, get down to Studio A. And I was as an assistant engineer the first day on a Duke Ellington session.
Wow.
Then it went from there, and then I started working with like Kool and the Gang a couple of months later, because the engineer didn't want to work at night. He was the jingle guy, and he didn't really like doing records. So he said, here, you do the session. Okay.
Amazing.
And it just went on. I mean, I was kind of born to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can clearly see that in hindsight.
Yeah.
We can hear that. So as a bass player, and being known for the way you mix a rhythm section on records as well, what are some thoughts you have about the bass and the kick drum, and what we might want to think about, or how do you think about it when you think about how they go together? A dumb, simple question is, are they the same frequencies? Is one lower than the other or higher than the other? Do you have any thoughts about that stuff?
Yeah, well, I go by the mantra, more bass at all frequencies, man.
Nice.
But, just as an example, most people, when they lay out their tracks, the drum tracks, they start with on channel 1, bass drum, snare drum, tom-toms, cymbals, hi-hat, whatever. I do it exactly the opposite of everybody else. I put the bass last, closest to me, and I mean the bass drum last. I start with the room mics and the tom-toms and the overheads, and then end up with the snare drum and then bass drum and then bass. So the bass is next to the bass drum, which makes more sense to me. So it kind of answers your question, how I feel about the bass and the bass drum, that they should sound like kind of the same thing almost. You know what I mean? They should be the tightest thing on the record. And it's really funny because I mixed a live Van Halen record, and they had a bunch of bass drum mics on that the guy had recorded, and one of them was a SM57, which just sounded like no bottom at all. It was just this very mid-rangey sound. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound like anything. I picked one of the other ones that had a bit more bottom, and Alex Van Halen came in and said, well, what that doesn't sound right. What mic are you using? And it turned out what he wanted was the SM57, because I said, well, this doesn't really blend with the bass. He says, it's not supposed to blend with the bass. It should be the farthest thing away from the bass. So who knows? Everybody has a different way of looking at it. And for that record, for them, that sounded right. But, so it made me think totally differently about some records. It's not always the bass and the bass drum should blend together, but I brought up, Media Sound was mostly R&B, it's Kool and the Gang and Benny King And Stevie Wonder I didn't really work with Stevie, unfortunately, but I used to hang out on his sessions because I was such a fan. But, we did a lot of disco records, and then I did Chic, which is very rhythm, drum, bass oriented. And so, I always had that in my head, is that the bass and the bass drum are the foundation of the record,
Yeah.
And
we got some questions about Chic, so I might as well pivot to that. Alex Owana was asking, he brought up Chic, and then also Dave Tuff was saying, your snares always sound unique. Are you mixing with samples? What was your EQ approach to the Chic rhythm section? Meaning, how did you get the kick and bass to work together so well?
Well, a lot of that's
big
just
questions
those guys.
there.
I mean, with Chic, it was these guys are amazing. And I just can't imagine taking any credit away from Bernard Edwards and Tony Thompson, because they're brilliant musicians. But I will say that they were our drums, the drums that I bought for Power Station, and I tuned them, and I would take Tony Thompson's key. I'd take the drum key away from him so that he wouldn't mess with it.
Wow.
I said, look, just don't make, and I'd go out between takes and touch up the tuning of the drums. Even though I'm not a drummer, I would go in at night sometimes and spend hours and hours trying different tunings on the drums.
Wow.
Just to try and get certain things. And so I taught myself how to tune the drums and how to get them to sound a certain way. And so that the drum sound was all, other than the fact that I didn't play them, Tony played them with much talent.
Would you hit the drums and actually record samples on tape and then go back and listen to how it played back in the control room?
Yeah, I would do that. And then later on, I would record my own samples too, So I was very aware of drum sounds. I mean, early on at Media Sound, somebody said to me, commented on drum sounds, and all of a sudden this thing got in my head about, the drums especially doing R&B records, it just seemed like a really important thing. And I was a big fan of some of these Philadelphia R&B records, and some of the Motown records sounded incredible too, and it was an important part. Plus the fact that there were rock records where, listen to Stairway to Heaven. It's one of the best snare drums ever recorded, I think, by Andy Johns, and Glenn Johns as well. These guys, they knew what they're doing, when it came to recording drums, and they do it with like 3 mics, which really pisses me off.
And I think it started out as 2, and then there's the famous story of like accidentally turning the guitar mic around and discovering the 3rd mic over the floor tom or something like that.
Really? I never heard that. That's a good one.
Yeah. I think that was in Glenn's book. He was talking about how they stumbled on that in the studio, and the track was just still an input. So all of a sudden they were like, what's that drum sound?
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I got to read that book.
Well, very cool. Well, I think it's just such a wonderful reminder to hear you talk about, don't be afraid as an engineer to pick up an instrument, find out how something that you do on an instrument translates through the microphone all the way into the control room to get that sound that you're kind of wanting to hear.
Absolutely. And I should kind of go back to your earlier question about playing bass.
Yeah.
That came from, because we had it was more of a workshop band at Media Sound with Harvey Goldberg, and a guy named Godfrey Diamond was the drummer, and Michael Barbiero, who became a big producer, mixer, he's a keyboard player. And we all worked there, and we'd come in on weekends and record ourselves, our miserable songs that we wrote. I should just speak for my own self. The songs that I wrote were pathetic. And so we called ourselves the Bats. And so and then Harvey's girlfriend was Genya Raven, who produced the Dead Boys album.
Oh,
so
wow.
I knew her because of that. She'd come to some of our sessions, and so she knew that I played bass, and she knew that I'd do it for free because they didn't have any money.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean,
so anyhow, that's how that transition happened. Because I wasn't a working bass player.
Yeah, well, just I hear you describe the story of bringing your friends into the studio and recording, and who cares what the songs are or any of that stuff. It's like don't let that be a thing. Just get in there and record.
Yeah.
Because it really does open your understanding up to the whole process a lot more. Even just being on the other side of the glass, knowing what it's like to have a pair of headphones on, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were lucky because Media Sound let us come in on off hours and use the studio. They're smart, thinking that, well, we'd learn we could make mistakes, right? When we're recording ourselves, who cares? Right. But that way we'd avoid the mistakes when we're actually working with clients.
Yeah, indeed. And I think now with people having home studios, a lot of them being musicians first, there's sort of no excuse not to do that, right?
Right. Exactly.
Look, I love using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the subscription bundle. For only $19.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. And just for you Rockstars, get an extended 30-day free trial subscription at iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscription. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so that your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more missed mix messages from the band. Phew! Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at samplyaudio.com and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off for the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Bob Clearmountain, joining us from Mix This Studio in Los Angeles. Did you say it was Los Angeles or no, it was something out?
Well, Pacific Palisades, which is part of Los Angeles.
Okay, great. And, again, just looking at the photo on your website, it's like tropical paradise. You print your mix and jump in the pool, right?
Well, not exactly, but occasionally.
Do you have a water slide that goes from the control room, from the mix position right into the water?
Well, we do have a water slide, but it comes from the upper yard. We're in a canyon, and so it's sort of there's a backyard that's higher up. It's the next level up from where we are down here and where the pool is in the studio. And so you walk up this stairway, and then it's like a 35-foot water slide that comes down to the pool. It's really fun.
That sounds better than hot and humid in Nashville, which it is right now. Although everybody's going to be hearing this a little later on. But there was a question I wanted to ask you as we were talking about bass, kick drum, drums, stuff like that. Can you share any advice for us on how to think about low-cut filters? I feel like that's one of the things that can be tough to discover along the way, is this idea of removing low end in a mix process to actually create a better low end experience in the mix.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of that. I mean, usually I would generally do a high pass filter on all the vocals. You know what I mean? Because just to avoid any kind of pops or proximity effect. And then something that's pretty standard is that and I tell this in a lot of seminars and things, that people struggle with the bass sound quite often, right? So you're sitting there trying to EQ the bass and trying to get bass to cut through by putting different kinds of EQs and tons of compression or whatever it is. But before you do that, mute the bass and then hear if there's any bottom end coming from anything. You know, a lot of times a keyboard, or there might be a guitar or something, acoustic guitar happens a lot where the mic's maybe a little too close to the hole, and there's a lot of bottom end coming off of some other instrument. But most of the time that's not needed. You know, you could roll that out of a guitar or a keyboard, and then put the bass back in. And all of a sudden you're going to go, oh, now I hear the bass. Now it's not muddy anymore, because there's all those bass frequencies tend to conflict with each other, and they tend to hide each other, and it turns into mud. And if you just get rid of some of that, and a lot of times I'll, like, say acoustic guitar, you'll mix this ballad. I'll mix a ballad where it starts with just acoustic guitar. So I'll just have it full frequency. And then once the bass kicks in, I'll click in a filter on the acoustic guitar. And you don't notice the difference on the acoustic, because the bass is now taken over for that part of the frequency range. And, but the bass is, you get this nice clear bass sound.
So that could be for those of us mixing with plugins and stuff, that could be just enabling a filter and a plugin in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the box, it's simple. For me, I gotta have to do, well, I mean, I can do it in the box as well, because, you know, everything's coming from Pro Tools anyway. So sometimes I'll just do that on that track.
And do you sometimes do the reverse? You know, you get a breakdown section and you put the low end back into the acoustic?
Absolutely. Yeah, quite often.
Do we have to sort of have our ears on, because sometimes that will create a pop in the mix or anything like that?
Yeah, well, make sure it doesn't click. You know, I mean, Pro Tools has a great feature where you can just do it on a track. It's got this little button, and this whole thing comes up on the top of the window there, and you can just isolate a section, and you can filter it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it'll just click in and click.
Oh, you mean you're talking about like using the clip effects where you're actually filtering.
Clip effects, that's it.
Oh yeah,
that's
yeah, clever.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know what it was called.
No, that's great, and that's you know, and then that gives you the ability also to put a little crossfade between them if there was a pop, and then that takes care of it. Very cool, awesome. Now, what about using high pass on the actual kick drum or the bass? How often is that something we should be thinking about?
Well, it depends on the original sound. I think, you know, sometimes if a bass is too boomy, I will put a bit of a high pass, because if there's too much, it's gonna kick compressors. You know, it's gonna kick a compressor in a radio, or if you're mixing through a bus compressor, and it'll turn your whole mix down if there's too much bottom end coming through. And so, yeah, I'll do that, or a bass drum that's just got, you know, depends on how it was mic'd, or if it's a sample, if there's too much bottom on the sample. Yeah, definitely, occasionally, you know, I mean,
yeah,
not always. On my SSL, I had to add a side chain to the stereo bus compressor, and I have a high pass on the detector, so that any big bassy, you know, big kick drums don't kick the compressor too much. And that you can do in the box really easily.
All right, cool. So I thought I would pivot over to some more of these questions coming in from the Rockstars, and we'll just see if we can jump through a bunch of them and hit them as best we can. Here's one from Kyle Andrews, who said he watched your mix with the Masters for Born in the USA. And he's also an amazing producer and musician himself, an artist. He said the raw track sounded like a band playing direct into a PA, and that it's not a hit song until Bob does his thing. Really dang impressive. Curious if you were able to hear all that in your head before mixing, or if you sort of found that as you went, Bob.
No, I just found it as I went. I just the kind of thing. I just dive in and start mixing. And then, there's a lot of input from Bruce. Bruce was into the big snare drum thing, and a bit more so than me. And he's always pushing the, well, not always, but in that record, he always wanted to hear the slap on the voice. And I would kind of disagree with him because I really like his voice, and I always want to hear him close up and not with a bunch of effects on it. But he liked to hear, I guess it makes it a bit retro sounding with that slap, like the old 50s records or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, the drum sound was. I remember on that whole album, the Born in the U.S.A. album, there was this one snare sound that we had on a song called "Glory Days," and it was a sample that we came up with for that. And he goes, Bobby, put that Glory Days snare drum on this thing, And so some of them had the similar, we were just starting to use samples, and he discovered, wow, you can do that. You can take a snare drum from one thing and put it on another thing.
And was this back with the carts, the Wendell machines and stuff like that, or what were you using?
Yeah, I was just using I think I was using an AMS. It's probably this thing right in front of me, which is it's called the 15-80S AMS, which you could store samples in. Of course, you had to do all this tricky thing. You had to play the trigger off of the sync head and then delay that to get it exactly in sync with the snare drum. This whole trick that you had to do.
And would you guys just trust your ear that it was in sync, or would you sort of pull out a scope and kind of line up visuals or anything like that?
No, I trust my ear until this guy in Texas came out with a thing called a Russian Dragon, where you could put the original snare on one channel and the sample on the other channel. It would tell you just how far off you were, and you just tweak it until it looked right.
Wow. I remember hearing about the Russian Dragon.
Yeah, I still got one. It's a rack spacer now, basically.
Yeah, that's
still
cool.
in my rack.
All right. Well, so there was a follow-up question to that from Andy Freeman saying, how can a mix influence an artist's career? I've always thought the reverb and delay atmosphere on Born in the U.S.A. was a sonic way of saying, quote, hey, this guy will be playing stadiums for the rest of his career, quote, like the sonics were a predictor of his next career move into superstardom, dressing for success, if you will.
Well, he was used to the big show, right? Because he played in stadiums and arenas. And so he wanted his record to sound like that, as much as possible. He wanted it to be big sounding. I actually asked him back then, this was before he really had done any YouTube, I was going to say any MTV videos. MTV was the big thing back then. And because everybody was doing videos. And up until actual Dancing in the Dark, which is on that album, he never really did any. He said, Bobby, televisions are small. Back then they were little things compared to now. He goes, and my thing is big. It's just too small down there in that little TV. And okay, so that was his. He went through a lot of different stages. Obviously, he changed a lot after that, and got into more intimate types of records. Like Lucky Town and stuff like that, where he was on more solo stuff. But for that particular stage in his career and that episode, that he was into the big thing.
Well, I remember in sort of learning some of the physics of sound, one of the ways you make something sound bigger sonically is you can make it louder, you can have more harmonics in it, and you can also make it longer in time. And, of course, in that one, the big super snare reverb thing is all about making the snare a longer sound in the mix. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And maybe more bottom on it and more top end. I don't know. More everything. More frequencies.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll pivot over to see if I can find it here. It's one of the questions from Alex Oana, and again, Dave Tupp talking about the the Chic rhythm section and your EQ approach, were you adding low end and boost to that kind of disco kick and snare? Is there anything you want to say about that? And as far as adding bottom to a snare?
Yeah, I would. I would certainly add bottom. 100 or 200 cycles, something like that. I mean, I shouldn't say specifically what frequency, because you just turn the knob until you get the sound that you want. Basically, that's what I would do. I really wouldn't think about what specific frequency, but sure, I mean, back then that was the thing, the big fat snare drum. I remember there was a record called Gladys Knight and the Pips record called Midnight Train to Georgia that actually recorded by my friend Eddie Stasium, and it just had the ultimate fat R&B snare drum. I just loved the way that sounded. So I was always trying to go for that back in the R&B days. But then doing a little of that to rock records, that was a nice thing too. When I was doing Simple Minds, we had a big sort of fat snare drum on those records.
Yeah, those records are amazing. Great stuff. That INXS, that, Yeah,
INXS too.
Yeah, you just did so many. You took the snare thing and you turned it into, an iconic kind of sound that you just gave it real character. It wasn't just a thing. It was like a voice in the music, in a cool way.
Well, when I first started working with Bryan Adams on the You Want It, You Got It record, the first one I did with him, I remember people telling me about this thing called a Black Beauty snare drum made by Ludwig. And so I called around, all these different music stores, and the only one I could find was at Sam Ash in White Plains. So Bryan and I drove up from Manhattan. We drove up to White Plains, and I said, "Look, hold it for me, okay? Don't sell it to anybody." And I'm sure I paid top dollar. Of course, nobody knew who Bryan was at the time. Nobody had heard of him, and they probably hadn't heard of me either, I'm sure. And but anyway, so we bought that, and then I just used that on so many records, and I think that ended up being on some of the Chic records too, I think. But just all, everything I recorded, I just tried to use that snare unless the drummer insisted on his own.
Wow, that's thing. Yeah. When I think about a Black Beauty snare drum, I think about the rock and roll, the Kong, which it's so great at. It really can speak into the room mics. So it's very cool to hear you remind us that could be the Chic sound, where you're sort of getting that dead sound too. It's just all about having a great instrument and then playing it or tuning it different ways to get different sounds.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a very versatile snare drum.
Yeah.
You get a lot of different sounds out of it.
I guess I got to get one now.
Good luck.
I'm still doing the Supraphonic. That's sort of my versatile snare drum right now.
That's a good one too. Yeah.
And an Acrolite is another one that I like a lot here. And then I like all the weirdo thrift store, the pawn shop, indie rocker snares that all just sound weird and different too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's a question from Robbie Valentine. Robbie says, he mentioned in a previous interview that's you, Bob, that he gives artists multiple mixes, one normal, one with the vocal 1 dB louder, one instrumental, etc. Are you still doing that? And what's the reason for volume changes? Are you giving mixes with certain instruments for playthrough videos on YouTube? I think he means like, a minus vocal mix is what I'm guessing he means by that.
Well, the standard thing, and I think it's not just me, but it's pretty standard, that you do a normal mix, you do a vocal up half dB, a vocal down half dB, a backing track, which is no lead vocal, but with backing vocals, and then instrumental mix, no vocals, and then an a cappella, which is just vocals without any music. And sometimes it's a separate lead vocal and separate backing vocals. Of course, now there's also the Atmos mix that goes along with it. But and I used to do all the 5.1s. I do all those versions in 5.1 too, but it got to be just too much too much data. And so now I just do the main mix and an Atmos mix. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a standard thing just because that's the one comment that people make. Oh, I don't hear enough vocal or there's too much vocal. Those are the things that you always get later. And that way they can fix it in mastering, or they could just do an edit for a verse or a chorus or a phrase between the normal mix and a vocal up, something like that. If somebody feels they're not hearing it in a certain place. I mean, I try to get it right. I really try hard to get the vocal in exactly the right place. And so they don't get used often, but once in a while they do. And it's handy to have them.
Is there a process that you go through that might feel similar to us? For example, are you mixing, you mentioned all the Atmos speakers. I don't remember what you said were your stereo speakers up front, if you're still using NS10s, for example, or anything like that. And then do you also go listen to your mixes on other systems that help you arrive at sort of the amalgam of this is the right level for everything?
Well, let me see. For stereo, I have these little Yamaha things that you can't get anymore. They stopped making them. But they're not NS10s. They're, I think they're called YSP7, something like that. And they're a little self-powered. They're like an NS10, but they sound better. They're not as harsh. They got a more bottom end. They're actually really nice sounding speakers. And but then I used to use these little Apple speakers, but I kind of burned through every pair of them. And but what I did, I have a Sharp standard definition TV for the SSL that displays the, I don't know if you can see it up there, but it's turned off at the moment. And but it's got stereo speakers. It's got a speaker on either side. It's not like the TVs now where the speaker's in the back. It actually has speakers facing forward.
All right.
And they sound pretty good. And so I just plugged into there after all my Apple speakers died. I just said, well, there's speakers up in that TV. I just plugged, and I really like this. I mean, it doesn't go very loud, but I get a good idea of, can I hear the bass? Can I hear the bass drum? Is the vocal too loud, too quiet? You know what I mean? It gives me a really good general reference because it's quiet and it's kind of, it's more like a normal pair of speakers.
Yeah. It's more like how you might just experience it if you were out and about and hearing it in the real world. Yeah. Did you ever used to mix on the speaker that would be, I remember some 2-track print machines would have a speaker on them. I forgot which ones did, but.
The old Studer in Power Station, we had these Studer B67s, and they had a little speaker in the meter bridge. Yeah, and sometimes I'd mix through those. They were great, actually. I mean, they're horrible sounding things, but, if it sounded good on that, oh, okay. If you can hear everything, at least a little bit.
Yeah. Do you hit the mono button as well?
I used to, not so much anymore because pretty much everything's stereo now. I mean, television's all stereo. And so, yeah, I mean, we used to have to make compatible mono mixes. That was one of the other versions that you'd bring in the sides a bit so that in mono, the stuff way off on the sides wouldn't disappear. And, but no, not so much anymore. Once in a while, I'll just listen to mono for fun. Or sometimes I'll actually do a mono, I'll mix the whole thing in mono.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
The STX-100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX-100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX-100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra 19 1964.com or call 801-797-0642. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt Force certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to seamlessly stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. Now, the possibilities of how you can use your Mac Mini are limited only to your imagination. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. You know, I find myself using the mono trick with a single Avantone mix cube, and really appreciating that. But it does the same things you're talking about, where it's like I can listen really quietly. It's very easy to hear if I can hear something or can't hear something.
Yeah, right.
But then sometimes I wonder, based on what you're saying too, if things are always in stereo, maybe it's smarter to have 2 of those side by side or something.
I would think so, yeah.
Okay, there you go. Now I'm gonna have to go order another one as soon as we finish this call. No, it's good. I love using that. All right, well, let me keep moving forward because I don't want to skip anybody's questions. So, Rob Coleman asked if you wanted to share any of your favorite ways to use drum room mics in your mixes. Any thoughts about that?
Well, once again, the room mics depends on the music and whether you even use them or not. Sometimes I don't even use them if it should be a tight sounding mix. And also depends on what sort of room they were recorded in. And I mean, usually I prefer them to be stereo. I get a little annoyed. I mean, one of my big beefs is these things where you'll have 3 different room mics on a recording, but there won't be one stereo pair. There'll be a real close one, a semi-far one, and then one in the next room or something like that. So there's never a stereo pair, which it just seems crazy because we have 2 ears, and if you go into a room, you're listening to the room with 2 ears. So how valid is that just to have a mono? And it's just, drums are usually stereo. I can understand some people kind of like that for whatever reason. That's fine. But, if you're going to record something, at least do one stereo pair of room mics. You know what I mean? And especially if you're mixing surround or Atmos, it's just a great thing to put that stereo room mic in the rear speakers,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because then now you've created a very real sounding environment with the drums in the front and the room in the back. I mean, that's to me, it's pretty important. It can be. It can really change the whole feel of a mix.
Well, and it's fascinating to hear you talk about that and think about how we might find ourselves actually producing and recording things where we can't recreate the Atmos mix while we're doing it, but we're sort of thinking ahead, in the same way that you do a vocal up mix because it might be needed. You might need to think, hey, I need to provide things for the possible Atmos mix.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do whatever room mics you want, but just have one stereo pair, somewhere that's like, a good distance away from the drums and maybe even facing away from the drums. I usually mic the room. So I'll point the mics at the ceiling of the room or the back of the room. And so you really get the sound of the space. And
where would you
at least one stereo pair?
How would you choose to space the mics? I mean, do we think about them as far apart from each other, close to each other?
I usually put them apart so that you get more of a stereo spread. If you can. I mean, of course, it depends on the room, but yeah, I'll put them, maybe 10, 15 feet apart, and then pointing out sort of opposite directions and kind of at the walls or ceiling.
How much, I'm sort of thinking of real world, home studio / pro studio situations. How much should we concern ourselves with the fact that if we listen to each of those room mics, we'd be like, oh, I seem to hear a little more kick drum in this one and a little more snare drum in that one. They don't always sound matched if we space them out in a studio setting,
That's true. That happens. Yeah.
Any tips on, what we should worry about with that and what we don't worry about it because it'll be great kind of thing?
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Right. There you go.
If it's a little, if the stereo's a little odd like that, I don't know, makes it more interesting to me. I never think of things like that as a problem. I've heard some records where the drums just, almost sound out of phase or something like that. Listen to old Todd Rundgren records, some of my favorite recordings, and what's the big deal? Does it work with the songs? Does it work with the music? That's all you really care about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These little specific things about, I hear a little more bass drum on the right or something.
Yeah. I love it.
I don't know.
Going back to your punk rock roots.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't get real. Sometimes I get picky about that stuff, but I'd rather have that than no stereo.
Yeah.
Room at all.
Great. Okay. Here's another one from Alex Oana, saying, do you have if you were to pick top 3 favorite mixes you've done, and then he says, and Fallen Angel by Robbie Robertson better be one of them, smiley face.
Well, there was Fallen Angel by Robbie Robertson. Yeah, that would be the, geez, it's so tough because, that I wouldn't have thought of that one, but now that you bring it up, that might be one of them, as it took like 2 days, I think.
When do you go back and listen to your own discography?
Never. Are you kidding? No. There's certain things that I listen to. I listen to Crowded House records. Just because I like the songs.
Yeah.
I listen to some of the Squeeze stuff that I've done. I listen to Amy Mann, like the Whatever album. I just one of my favorite records I've ever mixed. Let me see. A couple of the Bryan Adams things, maybe. But it's more to do with the songs than anything else, I think.
When was the last time you gave I don't have to ask that version of the question, but I do want to mention Tattoo You, because I may have been late to the game, but that was kind of a first discovery for me back when I was in school about you and your mixing. And I remember listening to that. I got a vinyl copy and I put up Start Me Up, and I'm listening, and that first snare comes in and it just goes kaboom into the reverb. And I was like, holy shit, he jacked up the reverb on the first snare hit. That's the coolest thing. That's so cool. Do you have any stories you want to share about working with those guys or working on that record?
Sure. Let me see. Well, that was a fun thing. It's really Jagger. I didn't really get to, it was all recorded already pretty much. I did some overdubs. I recorded the vocal on that one.
Oh, right on.
And yeah, that little snare hit, it's weird because it's such an odd, where he hit it is he hits it on a 1, I think. 4. No, it's on 4. It's actually on 4. Yeah. And so I thought, well, that's unusual. And so I put like a gated reverb on it. It's not actually gated. I just put a reverb and then I hit the mute switch on the automation, So it's just one beat of thick reverb. And I thought this would be fun. And Mick was great. He's like, whatever. Yeah, it's fine.
I heard he dances around in the studio a lot.
Yeah, he does. Well, that was an interesting thing because he brings that in and there was no vocal on it, and I'm playing it, and he goes, "Yeah, it was called Start It Up, right? Originally on the track sheet." And he's going, "Yeah, man, it's about a motorcycle. Start it up." And he's singing it in my ear, like in the control room. He's like right 2 inches away from my ear, screaming it. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I mean, the guy's got a really loud voice, And so I'm kind of like leaning my head over away from him. And he's singing it to me. I said, look, why don't you go out in the studio and sing it?
That's great.
And so he goes out and he sings it, and he did a couple of takes. And at one point, the song is called Start It Up. And at one point during the outro or something, he said, Start Me Up. And I went, well, wait a minute. And then he comes in, we listen back. I said, listen, you say Start Me Up. That sounds better than Start It Up.
Oh, that's awesome.
It seems to flow better. And not only that, but Start Me Up, there's like a different kind of vibe, lyrically.
Big time.
I said, what do you think? I mean, it makes more sense to me as Start Me Up. And he goes, oh yeah, all right. And he went out and he sang Start Me Up.
That's amazing, man. Oh, what a good story.
I don't know if I don't know if he'll remember it that way, but it does say Start It Up on the track sheet.
Yeah. Right on. Well, you know what? I find in my experience that sometimes the consensus of stories in making records is less important than how good the stories are.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm really sure that that's how it went.
Yeah. Well, you were probably paying attention. We got another great question from Jason Knox, and this is kind of along the lines of other tracks on Tattoo You and just many other records too. He said, I'd be curious to hear him talk about adding subtle or sometimes not so subtle movement to an entire mix with flanging or other similar effects. I've noticed this especially on some of his mixes for Crowded House. And then he cited Fall Your Feet as one of those mixes. But I heard that on Voodoo, on Tattoo You as well, like flanging across drums. And, I'll just add to that sometimes, actually Jason added it. He said, it'd be interesting to hear him talk about what motivates him to make a move like that on particular techniques or tools he finds helpful for the whole mix effect. I hope that wasn't too many at once. It's basically like doing the movement, flanging, any tips for how we do the whole mix if we want everything to just like go to another place in a song.
Yeah, well, I'm just a big fan of flanging. And you're going to see a plugin coming out in a little while.
Sweet.
When it comes to that on Apogee. That's really going to be fun. But, there was a Faces song called Ichigu Park that I believe Glenn Johns produced and mixed. And it's one of the first most incredible tape flanging on there's this little bridge section that the drums are flanged. And it's just, go back, listen to this record, and it's just the most amazing thing. And then, of course, there was Hendrix at the end of, was it Axis Bold as Love? The whole outro there's this flange thing. And I just always loved that sound. I probably shouldn't say this, but I used to take acid when I was a kid. And there's a thing that happens, you get flanging and it's my theory is that your synapses are being delayed. Some of your synapses are being delayed and others aren't, right? And that's what happens. You get these split pathways of your optical, that's what causes the colors too that you see of your auditory nerve, where you get the same frequency rubbing against each other and one of them slightly delayed. And it sounds like flanging. And that's why these records have that. It's because these guys were taking acid and Glenn Johns or somebody came up with this effect with a tape flange. And then everyone went, whoa, that's it. That's tripping. We got to have that on my record. And I've just always liked that sound. And I used to do it on a few things. And the opening to Good Times for Chic, there's this big piano gliss, and I did like a tape flange on that. And
yeah, it's hard to do too. I've tried to do tape flanging before, and it's
hard.
It's not an easy task.
It's really tricky with tape. Yeah, but now this new plugin is going to make it really easy.
That's groovy. I remember I had a chance to work with Tom Lord-Alge, and he was talking about you can discover flanging also as a DJ if you got the same record trying to play close to each other.
Yeah, the same record. You just You just hold your finger on one of them a little bit, and you'll get. That's exactly right.
And I guess the flanging effect was because you would reach over and grab the flange of one of the tape machines that was playing back the same mix, and you just kind of touch it a little bit, and it would throw it in and out.
Well, that's the idea. Yeah, that's where the name comes from. I mean, it's a little easier if you have a vari-speed or something like that.
Yeah.
But like Fall at Your Feet, there's this section in the middle where he kind of, this is like real dreamy section. And I did like I can't remember what it was exactly that we did, but it's like a flanging kind of thing. There's one other song. I can't remember what it was, but there's
all right.
A couple places.
If it comes back to you, just
pull it out with some. I mean, I actually wrote a little program for Eventide when I have this thing called the DSP 4000, which came out in the early 90s. And I wrote a little program for them that does that, actually, because it was the first digital device where you could change a delay smoothly, you know.
Well, I'm excited to hear your plugin when it comes out. That's going to be awesome. And then are there any considerations as far as routing the mix through flanging? I mean, do we just take the whole mix and run it through a flanger? Do we sometimes need to not include the bass or not include an instrument, or is that just a creative choice, really?
When I do it with the Eventide, I'll record the whole mix on a separate track, but sometimes I'll take the bass out. I'll take the vocal out because later on when I do a no vocal one, you don't want the vocal just coming through on the flange. And or also do two versions, one with the vocal and one without. And instead of having the whole signal, I just put the delay, I'll advance it in Pro Tools a little bit, and just by 10 milliseconds, and then put it through that, but not with the basic. It's just the delayed signal, and then mix that back in to the mix itself. So the flange occurs with that in comparison with the rest of the mix. So I'll just bring it up on a couple of faders, and the fader controls how much depth I get.
Oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm. And again, you're printing to a second rig, so you can do lots of little samples of this until you like one or something, right?
Well, that I'm actually printing it in a multi-track, in a separate track on a multi-track. When I do that, so it actually becomes part of the mix itself. So I don't have to use anything separate.
Right. And you're creating something that once you get it right, it's always going to play back that way, as opposed to sometimes we throw a plug-in on and every time we play the mix, it's random. It's different.
No, this is an actual manual sweep. So I've actually recorded it and spun the knob and gotten it to do a specific thing, you know, and it always does that.
All right, tough question for you.
You'll be able to do that.
Tough question for you, Bob. When we get to use your plugin to flange, are you going to let us lock it in so that we can do it one time and nail it? Or we'll just have to print it ourselves?
No, it'll be, you can automate it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. So let me jump to another question. This one comes in from Lynn Fuston. He said, are record labels asking for Atmos deliverables? Are they paying additionally for Atmos mixes? And then Jason Hall followed that up saying, he was asking again about Apple's spatial audio sound quality and the future of binaural. So you kind of answered that part already for Jason. But anything you want to say about what the industry is expecting from Atmos as far as mixed deliverables?
That's a good question. I wish I knew. It's still, everything seems to be really up in the air with Atmos. I don't really, I know so far I've only delivered one album, which is this Cahoots album for the band. And I had to deliver an Atmos mix and a 5.1 mix as well. So I had to do a down mix from the Atmos to make the 5.1. And the weird thing is that there's hardly anyone masters it. There really isn't any. There's one place in New York, this Emily Lazar apparently is doing mastering. So yeah, we had to deliver an ADM Atmos file. But the thing is that we're delivering it directly to the place that's making Blu-ray disc. And so, as far as delivering it to Apple and Tidal and Spotify and all these other places, I haven't figured that out. I mean, we're actually thinking of setting up a little mastering place for Apogee, so that almost just a QC thing. The other thing is that I know Apple's saying you got to deliver a stereo mix along with it, and they have to be in sync with each other. They have to be within 50 milliseconds of each other. And so there's all these things. There's a whole bunch of rules, but it's still kind of up in the air. It's kind of like Congress.
Nice. No politics. No, but actually, it was a follow-up question from David Stagel, saying, any thoughts about differences between mixing surround versus Atmos? So we may have to decide if we're mixing one or the other. Is that the way to think of it? And we can answer this in kind of base. I know we leap between sort of beginner questions and advanced ones, but hopefully that's okay.
Well, for me, now that I've changed everything over to Atmos, I'm just mixing stereo and Atmos. I mix them both at the same time, which is really easy to do. Well, it's easy to do in the box too. Although I don't know if anybody really does it, but it's Pro Tools. It's simple. It's almost designed to do that. But so I do them both at the same time. But I can't do a 5.1. I'd have to go back and redo it in 5.1 and then change everything. And I'm just not, I don't have the time or patience to do that. So I do a down mix. I mean, the down mix is pretty good from the Dolby renderer to 5.1. They give you some control over where the side speakers show up, and then the overheads just become, because they're quad, they become the quad in the down mix, and it works pretty well.
Right on.
And so, but I'm only now on doing Atmos and stereo.
Sorry, I guess I was going to follow what you said with when you say stereo and Atmos. So you don't need to make any different decisions between the stereo version and the Atmos version. Those two kind of live as one, or you still need to make different decisions for each?
Well, it's just where what comes out of what speaker, basically.
Okay, so not a level thing, more just like a position thing.
Right. I mean, a little bit. The way I do it on my SSL, because there's a monitor fader, the monitor fader is sitting post large fader. It's between the surround buses or the Atmos buses and the output of the fader. So the panner, the stereo bus, is getting the direct mix off the faders, right? But the surround buses, there's a monitor fader in between, so I can make little adjust. I can A/B on my monitor controller. I can go back and forth between the Atmos mix and the stereo mix, and I might say, oh, well, I'm not quite hearing enough of something in the rear, and so I can push it up a little bit on the small fader on the console. And you can do that in the box too, because you can have I believe, at least I know in 5.1, I think you can actually have an Atmos aux, right? And you can set them all at 0 unity gain, and then you can make little adjustments on that aux if you want to hear something more or less different than the stereo mix in the Atmos mix.
Now, doesn't Atmos also have objects or something where you can make things kind of fly around if you want?
Yeah, it does. And actually, because the what they call the bed Atmos mix, the ceiling are really just stereo. They're not normally quad. So I'm using 4 objects, which are permanently, front and rear for the ceiling speakers. But then occasionally, every once in a while, you might have some wacky, like on one Joe Bonamassa song, there's he does a backwards guitar solo. And I thought, well, this is cool. It's already backwards. So I'm going to stick it in. I have like a couple more buses for floating objects. And I just stuck it in there and spun it around the room, a bit. And so that's fun. Once in a while, you just have some fun. I mean, But most of the time, those things are for jet planes and helicopters flying overhead in a movie. And I don't do a lot of records with helicopters and jet planes or even rockets.
Can you
go figure?
Can you hide a recording of your voice that will only play back in the Atmos and like fly around? So like this mixed by Bob Clearmountain or something like that.
Yeah.
Fly it around.
I could do that. I don't think I will do that, but it's a fun idea. I could Paul is dead, maybe.
There you go. I am the Eggman.
Yeah, right.
The Toy Box Studio, aka Recording Studio Rockstars headquarters, is proud to announce that it is now an official Phantom Focus mix room designed by Carl Tatz. Yay! The beautiful new control room includes Carl's acoustic lens room treatment with the PFM HD 1000 master reference monitors laser aligned for holographic stereo imaging and depth of field with accuracy from 20 hertz to over 20 kilohertz. I've never mixed on a speaker system this awesome before, and it feels great. I used to feel like I would commit to a mix, cross my fingers, and hope that it would translate to the real world. But now, when I dream up a sound that I want to create in the studio, I just turn the mix knobs, and the Phantom Focus monitors tell me truthfully when I get it right. Amazing. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. Cameron Henry asked, when receiving a session to mix, what are some of the things that he sees some recording engineers delivering that he wishes more engineers did as well? You talked about the room mics aspect. Are there some other things that you see people delivering you for a mix where you think, I wish people did this a little more or didn't do this?
Let me think. Well, sometimes for some guitars, it would be nice if there was a DI along with the amp, even though I don't do that. I'm a real hypocrite when it comes to that. I'm a bit lazy when it comes to, but sometimes I do, because if you want to reamp the guitar later or something like that, it gives you the option to be able to do it. But I don't know if that's not real important. No,
I think that's a very common topic. The thing about DIs and guitars. I also don't do that because I usually plug the guitar straight into the amp.
Yeah, right.
But I think I need to train myself to start going through a DI on the way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. It's good when the drum mics are actually pointed at the drums. Sometimes I find it sounds like they're not.
Yeah.
And
what about vocal compression? Do you find people over or under processing the vocal before it gets to the mix?
Sometimes over compression. I tell you what is really bad is if somebody prints vocal effects on the vocal track, right? And you get this thing and it's got reverb on it or it's got delay on it or something like that. It's like, dude, don't do that. You know what I mean? And delays on guitars, if you want a particular delay, stick it on another track or something, because the delays are my thing. You know what I mean? It's like I have stereo delays, especially in the Atmos, because I'll want to bounce delays around the room or something like that. Or maybe I don't want any delay in a mix, but you print it on the track and you're kind of screwed. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, what do I do now? It's like you can't get rid of it. And yeah, if you have an idea for a delay, you put on another channel. The one thing I used to dislike was reverb, but I tell you what, guitar amp reverb, like a Fender guitar amp with that reverb, that's just such a cool sound that I'll put up with it. Yeah, I just like that sound.
Now, what about guitar pedals? So, I think that brings up a really good question. How do we think about the times when, yes, you want to go through the pedals because that's part of the performance of that guitar part versus, no, this is a thing that you're sort of preemptively making a mix decision with delay or reverb?
Well, that's the thing. If it's delay and reverb, just do it without that. But as far as distortion and things like that, or EQ, that's just the guitar sound. And to me, whatever whatever you come up with that you feel is the right sound, especially a guitar player. If this is his sound, that's what you want to record. You
right.
don't really,
right. Because
I'm not
now,
gonna tell somebody don't do that.
Now with black hole reverbs and things like that as pedals on guitar boards, sometimes that becomes these ambient guitar parts, and that's what's coming out of the amp, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mixing an album at the moment where everything was recorded through, the guitars are all recorded through this Kemper thing with massive delays and reverbs. And it's really hard. It's tough to deal with. It really is. Sometimes, I mean, luckily they'd recorded a DI as well. But sometimes it's to get exactly the right sound. I don't know if I need to buy more plugins or something. I don't know.
Right.
But
right.
It's practically impossible. You have all these delays and things, and it's mono. That's the other thing. It's usually mono. If it's stereo, at least it helps. But even then, if all that stuff was on all those effects were on a separate track, I could put them in the rear or something like that.
Or leave it as a plug-in that gets delivered to you, so you can recreate it.
Or that would be good too. Sure, that works.
All right, so here's a couple of questions from somebody you may know and remember, Jamie Tate, a great mixer here in Nashville at the Ruckus Room. Jamie asks, he said, Bryan Adams' Reckless album is still about the best mixes I've ever heard.
Thank you. Thanks very much for saying that. That's so nice.
He said, how do you get so much power without clobbering it with compression? He has mixed chops for days.
Thank you so much. It's a really nice thing to say. I don't know. I mean, a lot of it's the arrangements and just, I don't know, the way we recorded it. It's a good question, but I unfortunately, I don't know if I really have an answer for it.
Well, I guess power is sort of a abstract descriptor anyway. So maybe it's, I do think that a lot of us try and compress stuff more and make everything louder. And sometimes we lose power by trying to do that.
By too much compression, you do lose power, I think. I mean, a lot of it's dynamics. Compression's great, but you still want the dynamics are a lot of times what's giving you power.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's a fairly dynamic record, a lot of it, I think, and I mean, I try to keep as much dynamics in as possible while maintaining some kind of power. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. I can't tell you specifically.
Well, I do know we had a question. Let me see if I can find it. Somebody was asking to just talk about your mix bus. There you go. David Stride asked, what's your approach to compression on the stereo bus? Anything you want to share regarding that?
Well, I just use the SSL compressor and the thing, and I don't use it in auto mode because I'm always scared of something that says auto. Well, what does that mean? What's it actually doing? You know what I mean? I like to decide what the attack and release time is. I mean, the attack time is usually like 100 milliseconds, I think, and I don't know. Pretty fast. I usually use a fairly fast attack, but I want to, I don't want the attack so fast that it cuts off the attack. You know what I mean?
What are some things we can look for as we open the attack up on the mix bus? What sort of sonic? What comes through? What are stuff to just be aware of? Like, do we hear more thump coming from things, or
it's just more excitement. You know what I mean? It should be more in your face, but without it sounding flat. You know what I mean? Too much compression and it just flattens out, and everything sounds the same level.
Right.
You still want some dynamics. I mean, I never hit the thing harder than a bit over the 4 dB mark. I mean, between 4 and 8, but I'll never go past 8. You know what I mean? Some of the live stuff I hit it a bit harder because it makes it more exciting sounding, but usually somewhere around 4 or below. And
that's the gain reduction needle we're
the
talking
little meter on the
Yeah.
compressor. Something else I should say. Go on.
Well, I was just going to say, what about release? Any tips on how to think about where we want to set that release compression?
What? Hang on. Let me go look at it. One second. Release is 300 milliseconds. Okay. All right. Sorry, I had to look.
No, that's great. I almost want to leave that in because it's kind of cool to hear you just walk over to the studio and look at it, you know?
Well, attack time is set at about 100, and then the release is 300 milliseconds, 0.3 seconds. It says, you know, and sometimes, and then I change it between 2-to-1 and 4-to-1, depending on, usually 2-to-1's more for the ballads, 4-to-1's more for the rock stuff. So it pumps a little harder. And the other thing I should say about our compressor is that when I started mixing surround 20 years ago, I thought, well, I want the same compression for my surround mix. And so we expanded it to 8 channels, really. So it's a 6-channel surround compressor.
Wow.
And a 2-channel by using the extra VCAs in the desk. Luckily, this console has 8 extra VCAs. And now when we're doing Atmos, I expanded to a 16-channel compressor by getting 4 more VCA cards, and we linked it all together. And with the help of this genius Brandon over here, who's working on my console at the moment, and it's Brandon Duncan, so everybody knows
hey,
his name is amazing, and then Lucas Vandermeer, who is the guy at Apogee that. He's the reason this stuff sounds so good at Apogee, because he does all the analog I/O part of it, and that's the thing that really determines how good this stuff sounds. He's a fanatic. I mean, the guy's a complete lunatic fanatic when it comes to sound, and so between those two guys, they were able to turn this into a 16-channel compressor, and I have separate control over how much compression I get in the side speakers and in the surround speakers and in the overhead speakers.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
Amazing thing. Yeah,
I think that was always a question that popped up in my brain, which is if a stereo mix is about all these elements working together into the compressor, you know, how could that change in a surround or Atmos mix? And I guess the answer is more compressors, you know, maybe a helpful thing.
Yeah. You know, well, a compressor like that, I think I get the only one like that on the planet, because it's all analog. It's not a digital compressor, you know, and it's all based on that thing. And how it works is there has to be the Amos part of it is just a slave off the stereo compressor. So there has to be a stereo mix going through. So it's all based on the stereo mix, right?
Okay,
so
all right.
The mixes have to be basically the same for it to really work.
All right, cool. Have you got time for a couple more questions?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. John Fields asks why you don't use the underside mic in the mix. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but he was wondering.
Do.
You do? Oh, there you go, John.
Oh, yes. Well, the underside from the snare drum, you mean?
Yeah, I think that's what he was getting at. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know if that was. I don't know where that came from, but I guess his question was, do you use the underside mic of the snare?
Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. Usually I do, but I do a little SSL trick with it.
Oh, okay.
Which, I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'm going to do a plugin that does just that.
All right, awesome. Days. Awesome. Let's see. Shane Jewell asked he'd be interested to know some of your favorite samples from your old sample pack. And I would pivot on that and say, how do you think about drum samples today when you're mixing? Has it changed much since the way you might have thought about it initially?
Yeah, well, snare drum, I really avoid doing snare samples. If I don't have to, I only do it if I just can't get what I want out of the snare drum, no matter what, like, you know, compression and EQ or whatever it is. I just can't get a good sound. Then I'll add in a little snare sample. Bass drum, I do quite often. And I just have a couple of things that I don't, unfortunately, they're not on, they're just ones I recorded separately, and they're not on any of my sample CDs. So They're just sort of private private samples. And
but you do have samples packs that are available for us if we do want to go check those out and start playing around with those in our mixes.
Well, just those old ones. You know, I was the first one to really do sample CDs for East-West. And so there's Clearmountain Samples Volume 1. The second one is Percussion and Bass. And the third one is Samples Volume 2, I think. And
right on.
But I don't know if you can, they're hard to find now because that was a long time ago when we made those. And they don't have a whole shitload of velocities either, unfortunately, like the ones now.
Right.
There's so much, the ones now are so much better, really, I think, you know. I'm sure that Slate guy's got tons of really interesting things or whatever.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing tools now that we didn't have starting out.
I helped do a bunch of samples for Logic for their drummer program that they had that comes with the current version of Logic, and so we recorded a lot of that stuff. They recorded them all over the place, but we did a whole bunch of them at the Apogee studio.
Very cool. It was very helpful to hear you talk about how you sort of shy away from the sample and the snare, but it's totally okay to lean on it for the kick. I think that's a huge helpful tip. Jordan Chasan asks, how loud do you mix? I think he might mean speaker volume.
Well, generally fairly quietly for most of the mix. Then I'll crank it up at some point. But not, pretty quiet, I mean, less than 85 dB for certainly, maybe 60 or something like that. But I mean, that I can't tell. It gets to the point, if you mix too loud, then your ears are distorting.
Right.
And so it's really hard to judge when you get to like hip hop levels, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Not only that, but I want to keep doing this for another few years. And so, I already have just a little bit of tinnitus, and I don't want to make that any worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I feel like it can be challenging too when we find ourselves going between mixing where we really get to control that and still producing and overdubbing, where there's this feeling of things needing to be cranked up during overdubs and guitars and everything.
That's the other reason, one of the many reasons I don't like producing is because, I just don't like listening really loudly like that, I like listening quiet.
Well, you got to hear Mick Jagger, sing incredibly loudly in one ear and one time, and that was enough.
That's enough, yeah.
So Dave Merkel said, no question, but just a big thank you for the video clip. Don't refer to multi-tracks as stems.
Oh, right. I couldn't believe how many hits that got. Like,
that's funny.
My one big complaint, like,
that's great.
I so many comments about like, yeah, man, I'm so glad you said this. Well, I didn't get any, I don't think maybe one or two negative comments.
You won't have to re-explain it, but Rockstars just know that there's a difference between stems and multi-tracks, and it shouldn't be hard to find the video where Bob explains the whole thing. Donald Forrest Williams said, why an 1178? And maybe tell us what that is as you answer it.
Well, 1178 is the stereo version of the 1176. And, well, two's better than one. First of all, they're actually cheaper than a blackface 1176. And there's two of them. And not only that, but you can link them in stereo. There's a stereo switch. So on like stereo tom-toms or something like that. I mean, I always have it on the tom-toms, and it's great because your center isn't moving around if you put it in stereo. And it's just they're good. I mean, takes a lot less rack space because I have 3 of them in here. And so I would have to have 6 1176s. And I think they sound to me, they sound just as good. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there will say, oh, you're full of crap. They're not as good as a blackface 1170s. Yeah, whatever. Sure.
So if
Whatever you say, I'm sure you're right.
what you said about putting it on the stereo toms, we might recreate something like that in the box, for example, by routing our toms together into a stereo bus and then just compressing that.
That's right. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do it the same way. Absolutely.
All right. Very cool.
It's basically the same thing.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free." All right, here's another question from David Strite asking, do you reference or use rough mixes from clients? And any thoughts on that?
No, I usually ask for a rough mix. Yeah, I prefer that somebody, I mean, some people don't. They just go, no, go for it. So do what you think. But a lot of times, though, I usually want some kind of a outline of their feeling of, the arrangement or whatever, especially if it's a complicated, there's a lot of stuff on it, just how they use certain elements and what they were doing with them. Just some, and I'll listen to it carefully. And once in a while, I'll A/B to it. I'll usually put it in the session so I can A/B. And, but I usually don't, at some point, I just sort of forget about it and do my thing, but at least I have some feeling of what they were after, some idea.
Yeah. I know for myself, I love having the rough because I like to know that what I'm doing actually hopefully does sound better than
is better
where I started.
I was just going to say that. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Meet it and beat it.
My mix sounds so much better than that piece of shit that they did.
And then you don't want to come back later and go, oops, mine was just louder.
Right. Exactly. I'm pretty careful about matching the level.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a question. Now you can answer this one if you want to. I think it's asked as in a good natured spirit. Chris Shaw says, "Do you really know what all those knobs and buttons are for?"
I'm getting there. I'm learning.
Groovy.
Getting there. I got a whole bunch of news because I'm just adding stereo channels to the end of my desk over there, and so now I got a whole new set of knobs to do.
New knobs and
like
buttons.
A wide control or something. I don't know. There's some other knobs on that thing. But
awesome. And that kind of
much. I mean, I've been sitting in front of this desk since the late 70s. So if I don't know what it's doing by this time.
The question is, does the SSL know what Bob Clearmountain is for?
Yeah, right.
Here's a closing question for us. Yeah, you should ask it. Let us know what it says.
Yeah.
This one comes in from Donnie Hill, but also Jamie Tate was asking. I think everybody wants to know. And it kind of pivots from what you just said about the knobs and, EQing a snare drum where you just look for the frequency and you listen to it. Mixing on a console or mixing in the box with Pro Tools, what you talked about that more, but, do you encourage us to feel good about the fact that we can mix in Pro Tools? Should we really strive to create great work that way? Or should we still be thinking about getting out of the box and doing both things? Let me ask that question first, and then I'll pivot to something about the EQ in just a moment. What would you like to say about, the many of us who are mixing just in the computer and mixing that way?
I think it's completely valid. Obviously, it's incredible what you can do in a computer now. I mean, I've done a few mixes in the box, not anything really professionally, more for demo mixes for Apogee or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you're at a certainly disadvantage. It's just, I don't think you should give up mixing in the box for whatever reason. I just, I've been mixing on this desk for a really basically this style desk for a really long time. And so I'm used to it and it's fun. And I find it mixing in the box for me, and I can only speak for myself. It gives me a headache. It really gives me a headache having to open windows and these big menus of stuff and only seeing one thing at a time and it's just, it makes me nuts, really. I really have a lot of trouble with it. I'm getting old, I guess, mixing on this SSL. I mean, I really know it pretty well, obviously. And I really enjoy it. It's just so much fun to mix on this thing. And I mean, I bounce around, I get up and I walk back and forth because it's 72 channels, this big thing, big hunk of metal. And it's dead easy. It's so much easier and faster for me because, I mean, doing a mix in the box takes me a couple of days to just, first of all, I have to set it all up and, okay, what are the auxes going to do? And what's this going to do? And here it's all pretty much set up for me. And, I don't change much as far as aux sends and things like that. I mean, every mix I start from scratch, basically. I just normal out the board other than the effects returns. But basically it's everything's in the right place. And I just like it. That's all I could say. And I can't speak for anybody else. And I think mixing in the box, I don't know which one's better as far as sound goes. I mean, obviously I would tend to say, oh, well, mixing analog, it sounds better to me, but I've heard tons of things done in the box that I think sound fantastic. Some of my best friends, Chad Blake, mixes in the box.
Yeah.
And it's unbelievable what he does. And some other guys too that I know. So I don't know.
Well, it's almost like asking somebody, you know, who plays a Les Paul, you know, what do you think about playing a Stratocaster? And it's like, well, I play a Les Paul all the time. You know?
Right. Exactly.
Why would you worry about it if you've already got the perfect instrument for you? You know?
Yeah. And to me, this is the perfect instrument to me. And I enjoy it. And I mean, I do this because I like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I got to do it in a way that I hate, no, I'm not interested.
So then the other part of my question was, when you start out turning knobs and you learn how things sound by the ear and turning the knob, and then along comes the world of computers and you have this visual screen telling you what the shape of an EQ curve is and what this, you know, the cue point is and all that stuff. Do you think that like all these questions about frequencies just sort of just appeared because of that? You know, did everybody ask about that stuff before there were computer screens?
Oh, I think people thought about frequencies. Sure. You know, okay. I mean, maybe not as precisely as they do now.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I mean, it's nice to be able to see the EQ curve, I think sometimes.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I mean, I just like, you know, I know what's going to happen when I turn the, when I turn the red knob, I know what it's going to sound like. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know. Everybody's got their way of doing things, and it's all good. It's all good. You know, I mean, I would never, whether you look at it, I mean, I would encourage people not to look at stuff too much and consider what it sounds like by looking at it. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is my friend Shane from Apogee years ago at an AES show. He was doing a little edit a demonstration edit for somebody at the show, on the booth, and I think it was in Logic or something. And he did this edit. He goes, "Okay, now let's hear what that looks like." I thought that was really fun. Let's listen to what that looks like.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. You've been super generous with your time, Bob. Thank you so much for doing this one. Here's one closing question from Jones Nelson. What's your favorite Weird Al album?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
All
one.
right, there you go. Thanks, Jones. Bob, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that I forgot to ask you? And we talked about all kinds of great stuff. Anything you're excited about right now musically and records you're making?
Well, first of all, which should be out shortly is the fourth album from the band called Cahoots. And we actually did a bit of rearranging on it because I think Robbie wasn't entirely happy with the original mixes. And but then in Atmos, it's pretty much fun. And but just in stereo, I think it's a whole different take on that record. And I'm sure the diehard Cahoots fans are going to be really angry, but that's okay.
Yeah,
because it's fun. Robbie likes it, and he wrote the songs, and he was the main band member. But and I was a huge fan as a kid of the band, and so I loved all these records, and I grew up with this stuff, and so I like it. and then Joe Bonamassa, this record is unbelievable. This is one of the best records I've mixed in years. I mean, he's written incredible songs. Besides being an amazing guitar player, I still haven't met him or even spoken to the guy. It was recorded in New York at the Germano studio and produced by Kevin Shirley in Sydney. He couldn't get out of Australia because of the COVID thing. And he produced it totally online and then sent it to me to mix it here in LA. And so it's just like all over the place. But this record is just fantastic. I mean, it really, really is good. The whole album is massively good. And there's a song called Curtain. The single is out now. It's called Notches, which is a great song. And then the most amazing song is called Curtain Call, which is like the 7-minute epic. And it's just mind-blowing to me.
That's awesome.
And I'm really proud of it.
That's fun. It's fun to see, it's just cool to see you be so excited about making music. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Especially you get some incredible piece of music like this, and you're just like, it's just so much fun. I mean, I can't believe I'm still getting paid to do this.
Yeah. Oh, here's a question I didn't ask you. How do we look as young as you do after we've been making records for a while? You got any tips you talked about getting up and moving around while you're mixing, and any thoughts about just staying well and healthy with a life in the studio?
Well, first of all, I don't get out in the sun much, so that kind of helps probably. But I don't know. But thank you for saying that, whoever's saying it. And I don't know. You just eat right, exercise. I mean, I'm at the gym 3 mornings a week. We actually had to build our own gym at Apogee because I couldn't go to Gold's anymore. And
nice.
And just walk a lot, which I don't. I should walk more. But and don't eat junk. Don't drink soda. Don't drink a lot. Don't take in too much sugar. I don't know. I feel silly giving health tips. It's like I'm not the healthiest person in the world, but
the studio,
I'm doing okay.
It's so easy to eat, a bunch of junky stuff in the studio. Somehow, somehow Prince always managed to stay pretty slender, despite the fact that I think his favorite candy in the studio his favorite food in the studio was just hard candy.
Really?
I thought I heard something like that.
Yeah. But, one of the reasons I built my own studio was so I it was always that thing that when you're in a regular studio, okay, it's lunchtime and they bring that big book of menus over, and then you got to go through and figure out what you want to eat. And then by that time you're already hungry. And then by the time you pick something out and they send somebody out to get it, and then it comes in, now you're dying. and it disrupts your whole. It's not good for mixing, you know what I mean? And so this way, we actually have a housekeeper. Well, 3 days a week, not every day, but and we have an outdoor kitchen right out by the pool here, and she's out there, and she'll just come in and say, "Okay, lunch is ready," and I don't care what it is; it's just food. And I just go out there, quickly eat lunch, come back, and continue. And I tell you what, it takes so much pressure off. Just that one thing, not having to worry about what you're going to eat or what time you're going to eat it, or ordering. It really helps a lot, and it's good food, and it's always, you get somebody that knows what they're doing that makes something good.
Yeah.
Well, Rosa here is an incredible cook. She's really good.
It's one of the benefits that we do have about working in home studios is we can kind of manage how we want to eat and when we want to take breaks and all that kind of stuff. Bob, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. It's an incredible honor for me to be able to have done this interview with you. And this is a milestone for me. So thank you very much. Will you please let the Rockstars know where they can go find you online? Where would you like them to go connect with you? What if they need to mix their next hit record and they want to give away all the points? Just kidding.
Right. I'll take them all.
Yeah.
No, it's mixthis.com, which is my website. And you can go through and there's a little tour and everything. And then my manager is Kelly Musgrave at linearmanagement.com. And
I think the contact is on the contact form is right there on the website as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And just talk to her. And yeah, that's about it. Right. And I'd love to get, any comments on the website or things people want to see, because we just redid it. I just had my friend Gabby Koblick redo the whole thing, and it's a lot better than it was. We're trying to put more current stuff on there.
Yeah, it looks fantastic.
There's an entire discography. If you want to look, there's stuff up there that I don't remember at all. Really, I did that? I don't remember that.
That's amazing. And you wrote a great introduction on the website too. It was very, very friendly welcome.
Oh, thanks.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to connecting in person again at some point. And
yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. Actually, we might be coming to Nashville in a few weeks, my wife and I, to visit some Apogee dealers or something like that.
Oh, cool. Well, this may come out after that, but yeah. What's going on? Anything going on with Apogee? You want to give a shout out to this?
Apogee. Please check out apogee.com, apogedigital.com, because there's a new duet. The duet was the biggest selling product they ever had, and now they've come out with a really slick new one, and that should be available next week, I think. And there's new plugins. We're doing a new version of Clearmountain's domain. That's not going to be for a while. Probably not. Hopefully, we'll have it by AES time in January. I hope. But there's a lot of work to do on plugins. We do them all in house. We're not farming it out. We have this one guy who's actually an independent contractor, but he's really just one guy helping us, and a guy named Roger Rabindra is kind of directing it all from Apogee. So everything. Apogee is a really small company, and people should keep that in mind, because they're everywhere, but there's only like 35 or 40 employees, and so it's tough to get things. Well, it's not like U.A. that just churns stuff out, or Focusrite that makes all its crap in China. They make everything except for the duet. They were forced to make the duet in China because of Trump's tariffs. That kind of forced manufacturing in China for small companies that are usually manufacture here. I hate to get into political stuff again, but it kind of sucked. And but the duet's great. And there's a Symphony Desktop, which is also an amazing product. They have this thing called dual path, which makes, because they run DSP in both the duet and the symphony desktop, and it's really easy to maneuver through there. I mean, just go on the website; they explain it all.
Okay, cool.
Here.
Well, there is one final question I forgot to ask you, which is just this: if you could go back in time and find young Bob when you first started out playing bass, switch into the studio, and you say, "Hey, I've come back in time to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could, Bob?
Probably say don't bother trying to be a producer because you're not that good at it. I'd say maybe you should learn to play piano. I wish I had learned to play piano. You know, I can blink at it, but I can't really play it. And I should have. I wish I had learned how to play piano.
I think that's good advice. I'm trying to take that myself.
And good advice to anyone is figure out what you're good at and what you like to do best and what you're good at. Hopefully they're the same thing. If what you're good at you don't particularly like, well, learn to like it and concentrate on that. Don't try to do stuff that you're not good at. You know what I mean? Like I tried to be a producer. I didn't think I was that good at. I'm much better at mixing and concentrated on that and did much better. And that's just my advice to everyone.
I think that's awesome.
No matter what business you're in.
That's fantastic advice to wrap up on. Bob, again, thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting you in person. And thank you from all of us for your time and for your answers to all of our questions.
All right. And nice talking to you.
All right. You too, Bob. Talk soon.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, Carl Tatz Design, and Isotope. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to get access to lots of plugins. And sign up for your free account at sampleyaudio.com and get 2 projects now. Or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months of subscription. Plus, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. You'll find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. Just scroll down. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.